Hi, my name is Nicholas. Thanks so much for tuning into the Sifter showcase. Today, I'm joined by Gianni from the team and the guys from Massive Monster. We've got Julian and Jay with us. Hi, guys. How you doing?
Hey, hello.
It's so nice to be back talking to you guys again.
And it's a thrill to have you, especially after the past couple of weeks that you've had. So
Yeah.
I guess we'll just dive straight in. I mean, for me, and we'll get to kind of talking about the game in a moment, but you're fresh from the announcement during Gamescom's opening night. Cult of the Lamb, a new kind of dark, cute dungeon crawling, town building cult simulator. I was thinking when I saw that announcement, does anyone remember Happy Tree Friends? That kind of crazy animation where the characters always get up. It's kind of like that, but if all those characters were also in a cult. So, guys, just how are you feeling after the announcement? How has the reception to the game been?
Yeah, it's been absolutely incredible. I think we were really nervous about how people would respond to it because it's so different to a lot of other stuff that's happening at the moment, but it's also got so many similar things. It like draws from a lot of different places, but like you said, it has that kind of crazy Happy Tree Friends, dark but cute kind of aesthetic mixed together. And because of COVID, we haven't been able to show this to anyone. So with previous games, we'd take it out to shows and expos and get people to like play it, get their hands on it, and we could see what they like and they didn't. So by the time it came to launch, we kind of had an idea what people thought. But this time it's been like 2 years of just total silence. And so it was like there was a lot of nerves around it, and it's just been phenomenal. It's just been so exciting to how that people have reacted to it. We just couldn't have asked for it to be a better response. So we're really, really happy, really grateful.
Yeah, I mean, Jay bloody hit it on the head there. As he said, we kind of weren't sure of the reception. We kind of thought we're onto something because we kind of did when we were trying to pitch it out for publishers and to film back for a bit of funding. We always got a lot of great reception. So we had an idea, maybe we're onto something, but then actually releasing it and kind of seeing everyone talking about it. We're even just looking through the comments, it was kind of rare to see negative comments about the game, which was kind of weird. But we'll see when it's out.
I don't want to get too far into this without people who maybe don't have any idea what the game is, without a lifeline for them. So, 30-second elevator pitch, what is Cult of the Lamb? Or could you give us just a kind of a brief packaged idea of what this gameplay is like, what it's like to play this game?
Absolutely. Cult of the Lamb is a dungeon crawling hybrid base building colony sim game in which you start a cult of adorable woodland critters. The dungeon crawling side of the game is where you go out into this kind of dark mystical forest and you fight other cults and monsters. And that's where you'll find other followers to convert or bring or to have join your cult. And you bring them back to your base. Once you're back at the base, they'll work for you, they'll worship for you, and they will help build out this kind of cult. But you rely on them to get stronger in the dungeon. So you use them to perform dark rituals, and you can see some of that in the trailer where we have the sort of dark tentacle god. The other thing about these followers is that, sure, they're going to help you, but you also need to take care of them. So you need to feed them. You need to make sure they stay healthy, they have a bed, and you keep their faith levels high. If you don't, then they can start to resent you and dissent against your teachings and start little rebellions. And there's always ways to get rid of them. You can always sacrifice them to the dark gods if that's something that you want to do. And you can also give sermons. And the sermons are the way that you can brainwash your followers and kind of form what their beliefs will be. And that's the way that you can shape your doctrine and kind of create the cult that you want to lead.
Cult of the Lamb seems like it's trying to pull off a lot of things at once. But, if you could just kind of take us back to when development began with Cult of the Lamb, what was the kind of originating concept? What proved to provide the spark?
So with the Cult of the Lamb, we started with a prototype. And the idea was with the adventure paths, exactly what you're talking about. They were kind of smaller games with smaller scopes, but they took so much work because it was all single-use content. Every conversation, every quest was handmade, hand done, and it just took so long to do that. And the problem with that is once someone's played it, or even watch someone else stream it, that's it. It's done. They don't even need to play it themselves. They've had the thing. And so we were looking at other games that have are really, really good at creating stories within their games. And that's games like we were looking at RimWorld, Frostpunk, Crusader Kings 2, like games like that created their own drama, like emergently. And that was something that really appealed to us. But the frustration with some of those games is that we, coming from those kind of actiony games, we wanted to be able to take control of the main player and maybe go on an adventure as well. And so the idea was, well, what kind of game also creates like loads and loads of replayability? And that's, of course, like the roguelike dungeon crawler procedurally generated kind of top-down combat games. So the idea was, what if we took those two games and brought them together and tried to create like one cohesive thing where you were responsible for this group of people that like dramas could emerge from and you could grow attached to, like a Tamagotchi. Like you kind of, for some reason, you get really attached to these things, but you could still be the protagonist and go out and have your adventure and have that kind of be the loop. So I put together this prototype, and maybe almost 2 or 3 years ago, I took it to the other guys at Melbourne, at PAX Australia in Melbourne, to kind of see what everyone thought. And back then it was like a really weird concept. It was like you're on the back of a whale, you're diving down to the world to try and find people to kind of scavenge and come back. And that's kind of what I presented to the guys.
And Julian, how did you, obviously you were still part of Massive Monster at the time, but what was your, first kind of involvement with the project? What was kind of the first thing that you sort of laid your hands onto?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of saw this prototype Jay had made, and I was like, I kind of started playing it, and he was like, yeah, it's pretty crude to start with. You basically just had a bunch of dudes, and like they would kind of help you do stuff like the farming or something, and then you could kind of go down and do some combat. I think they might have helped you or something. But yeah, I was like, this is great. I could kind of see a lot of the potential in it, and I was like, this is awesome. But then on the other hand, I'm like, how are we going to actually like communicate what this game is and like kind of turn this into a package that we can kind of take to get some funding for to actually make. So I think there was a lot of iteration from like that point to actually like pitching it, where it kind of changed a bunch of games. Like it kind of turned into a game about like running a hell or something, and then kind of one where you're like eating the followers as like a god. So we kind of tried a few out, but we kind of found that like the player, it was much more enjoyable kind of looking after the followers. So yeah, we kind of turned to that, and then we just kind of kept working on it, and then here we are.
I was just wondering what you could tell us about the average loop of the game. Obviously you've got these two halves, you've got, this base building area, and then you obviously leave and you go and do your dungeon crawling stuff. What are you trying to, look at or trying to achieve with those dungeon crawling sections? Like what's the actual goal there?
So with the dungeon crawling, it's kind of driven by the needs of your cult, by the needs of your base. So you've almost got like a shopping list in the back of your head where like, all right, well, I need to buy some more beds for my followers because I've got too many followers and not enough beds. So I don't have enough wood and I don't have enough stones. So I'm going to go out and I'm going to go on this run and I'm going to scavenge these resources. And that's what I'm going to kind of bring back. But we also, alongside that, have, as you say, like the narrative structure to it as well, where there's a kind of overall kind of progress within that story of the game. But really the kind of day-to-day is kind of, addressing the needs of your followers and of your base and going out to get those resources or get more followers and bring them back. And in so doing, you kind of get further and further each time so you can gather more and more resources and more followers. And that's the sort of loop of the game. That's the core loop of the game.
And so while you're on those sort of And so the way that you sort of imply it is, it does remind me kind of something like Hades, where you're getting deeper and deeper into a sort of a linear. While the areas might be, or the rooms might be randomly generated, the areas themselves are set. You have your certain rings of hell in Hades that you're kind of working your way through. Does Cult of the Lamb sort of follow a similar sort of concept where you're getting deeper and deeper into a particular, the broader world that the game exists in?
Yeah, so basically the way we've kind of, again, this was like a lot of iteration, trying out different things. We actually started out with that kind of structure of just getting deeper and stuff like that. But what we found is the player, like, you're going and then, you want to go as far as you can in the dungeon, but then that kind of goes inverse with another goal you have of kind of getting back to your followers and looking after them. So we kind of had to like balance that. And kind of the way we did it was kind of trying to focus more on like these little bite-sized adventures, we would say, where, there's basically like 4 different dungeons. You go into one dungeon and you can kind of go from the start to the boss in like, I think there's little nodes basically, and there might be 5 nodes or something. So you can kind of maybe go through, beat a boss in 10 minutes or something. And it's just that way, it's kind of like, you can just hang out your base and kind of chill out when you want. But then when you kind of fill up for a bit of a, something a bit more actiony, you can kind of go have that little adventure and then kind of come back and chill at your base, so that we get this kind of like nice flow of, just kind of doing what you want.
Totally. And how do the rival cults factor into all of this? Like,
so in general, the rival cults inhabit each of the 4 dungeons. So each of the 4 dungeons has like a different cult leader, but they're all kind of united under this kind of old faith. And you're kind of essentially you're a heretic. The person who gives you life again so that you can start a cult in their name was kind of rebelled against these others, and they have imprisoned them. And your kind of goal is to ultimately free that being, that entity. And so each of the different dungeons has a different cult leader who's responsible for that area, and it's up to you to hunt them down one by one and destroy the non-believers, cleanse the heretics,
mess them up.
How do you take ideas that in any other game like prove to be really dark, and like you mentioned Frostpunk earlier, and like Frostpunk can get pretty grim, in parts. It's definitely a pretty grim game. But like when you're dealing with concepts like these, how do you go about, crafting them into a something that won't make people just go, oh, like, geez.
I think, it's definitely like a tricky balance, and it's like we want to make sure we get that tone right. But the kind of good thing is with like the cult concept is that you can kind of package things as like the followers are happy to kind of go through whatever's happening. So like, say if you're going to sacrifice them, if you've kind of taught them that, in afterlife, there'll be, heaps of riches and it's like the best, then like they're going to be happy to be sacrificed. And that's kind of like in the trailer, we have this like tend to come up and get this guy, but then he kind of has this little smile to the camera because, he's like, yay, I don't mind.
I think I missed that.
It's a little tricky, Nod. But
sure.
Yeah, I think kind of balancing it with that, and then like not getting too gruesome with anything with the followers, just because you do want to look after them, and we do want it to be a hard decision if you kind of have to do things that you don't want to do, unless sometimes they're just naughty boys and you're just like happy to murder someone.
Got to pull the weeds.
Yeah.
And when it comes to this, you mentioned you've spoken a few times about the teaching of the followers and what you kind of impress upon them. How does that system work? Is that something that you're able to talk about yet? Is it sort of is it almost like what am I trying to think of here? Kind of like a skill tree sort of thing that you're leading them down? Like how does that play out in the game in terms of the making the followers act or feel a certain way about things?
Yeah, it is a skill tree, but there's also a kind of other aspects to it. So when you're giving a sermon, you have a choice of topics of what your sermon's going to be about. For example, work and worship, or law and order, or death in the afterlife. And once you've given that sermon a number of times, you're given a choice to unlock a new doctrine choice. And that essentially, in terms of just gameplay mechanics under the hood, is a choice of 2 things to unlock. And it's either a ritual or it could be a trait for a follower. And so a lot of the stuff when we talk about the follower's belief, those are essentially traits that you can see in a lot of other games, where if a follower has that trait, then they will react in a certain way to something that happens. For example, if they have said they believe in the afterlife, when they see a dead body, they would become upset, and their faith level would drop. But because they believe in the afterlife, they go, okay, this is great. My brother or sister in the cult has ascended to the next world. Now I'm happy. Yeah, it's good. So they get like plus faith. So that's how you kind of change their beliefs by giving them these and removing these traits that you can unlock through the doctrines. But the doctrines also, as I say, have rituals, and you can choose between, for example, one of the choices is a fight pit in which 2 followers can fight to the death, but you then have a choice to kind of thumbs up or thumbs down, execute them or not. And, it'll make everyone else happy. Or the other unlock you can have is weddings. So you could have your followers marry each other. So it's up to you the kind of cult that you want to have. Like, do you want to have kind of a flower powery kind of thing, or do you want to have a demonic, dark death cult?
Julian, you've mentioned in previous interviews about the game that you found inspiration in film and places like that you might not expect. So films like Midsummer, for the cult setting. And I just found that really fascinating because, as much as that film is about a cult, it's also about, grief and healing and manipulation and things like that. And so what is it about Midsummer and other sort of folk horror media that spoke to you coming into this game or speaks to you now?
Yeah, I think what I love about a lot of them is they kind of have a lot of mystery behind them. That kind of that like they have heaps of depth where it's kind of like you just kind of see the surface of it, and I just love all the kind of like there's a lot of like connotations with things that are used in it. So like just a basic thing of like when I was researching like cult members always kind of looking the same, they kind of lose their identity. So like there's just kind of like a lot of interesting motifs in cults and things like that I thought would just like apply really nicely in games, and I think like if just applying what you're kind of interested in into a game just makes it so much easier to make.
And do you think that people are going to be surprised about some of the themes to be found in Cult of the Lamb, or are you just trying to kind of have more of a straightforward narrative that serves as a good basis for the gameplay loop?
I think the goal has always been to try and have you create your own story as much as possible. But it's been a very, very difficult design challenge to do because you don't just get this base and then it's like, okay, now do your thing. It's like we also have to push the player into doing the dungeon crawling. And how do we do that? Well, like obviously there's resources, but there's also needs to be like a narrative push. And so we've been trying to balance that as much as possible. But the goal has always been to have the game create stories for you. So, right. So there's one that we told in another interview where the followers all sort of died. They all got sick and they died. And so I chopped up their meat and put it into the cooking pot and like created a whole bunch of food. And then I went out and got more followers, and they came back and they all just started eating the food and they had no idea the horrors that had just happened. And so I'd sort of so they were just kind of happily like living their life surrounded by this horror that had just occurred 5 minutes earlier. So like we're trying to create situations like that where you can create your own story and the emergent elements of the game come together in such a way that you create that. And actually, recently we've been doing a big push for the dungeon crawling side of the game to put in a lot more randomness and a lot more kind of challenges and different events and some gambling-y kind of mechanics. When I say gambling, I don't mean like actually gambling, but I mean like a risk-reward kind of mechanic. Sorry.
Sluts. Cult of the Lamb sluts.
Yeah, loot boxes. Loot boxes. Which has also helped as well. So it's like, this is the run where we want to have that goal of like, this is the run where this happened, so we're trying to push really hard on that and like because again, it goes back to that founding principle of like single use content is just so difficult with a tiny team to kind of justify with like our game with the adventure powers and things like that. So that's been the goal narratively, but it's definitely not been easy. And it's been like, Julian makes a really good point. He often says like, we're not just making one game, we're making two games. And so, it's not just like one huge game, it's two huge games. And trying to like marry those two things in a way is kind of tricky, particularly when there aren't many games about making cults. So there's not a lot of like references of other games that we can go, they just did it that way, or this is the way that it's done. So there's been a lot of like iteration and trying to figure this thing out. But it's moving in the right direction and we're getting very excited about it.
I was just gonna say, it was like kind of in that process, like even just like turning cult themes into like systems was like, just a lot of, we went through heaps of different ideas trying out like how do you actually turn that into a mechanic, and like in the end we just made it super simple and it worked really well. But
so when you say super simple, like what do you mean? Do you mean just as in building a good basis for the kind of emergent stuff to sprout from?
I mean, so as a basic example, like as a cult and as a cult member, you need to kind of be worshipped. So, we're like, well, how do we turn that into something? And basically, we ended up just kind of you kind of have a shrine at the start of the game, and you can kind of choose for a follower to either worship it or do some work. So if they're worshipping it, they kind of fill up this like bar, and when that's full, then you kind of unlock new buildings. So we kind of just tied a lot of the progression in the game is just tied to the cult systems. Is how we've kind of done it.
Jay, in your last answer, you spoke a little bit about RimWorld being like a major inspiration for the game, gameplay wise. So I've not played RimWorld, but for people in the audience that perhaps have, and I know that you might have alluded to some of this before, is it with that? Are you mainly talking about kind of the emergent, just the sheer number of systems in the game that can create stories for characters and players? Sorry.
I would be absolutely honored if we could even be like mentioned in the same breath of that game, because it is so deep. It is so deep and phenomenal. And I know the Luden Studios have just put in years and years and years of work, so it'd be very difficult to come close to that. But in terms of the way that the colonists in that game kind of operate, they have tasks, they kind of, I know it's inspired by Dwarf Fortress as well, but I've kind of never been able to break into that. So RimWorld was always great for me, but I always love the way that Tynan Sylvester, the director behind the game, always said this is not a game, this is a story generator. And ours is not a story generator, ours is a game, but we do have influences. Yeah, we do have some of those influences. So things like followers' faith are affected by the thoughts that they have, and that's a very similar sort of system that RimWorld have, where they're influenced by things around them, and it helps raise their happiness and lower their happiness. And we have that for their faith, and so just in terms of that kind of the way their base operates and the stories come about, that's been like an inspiration for us to try and have the followers become interesting and reactive to. And kind of dynamic to the way that you play. So even when you like beat a boss, they become very happy, and you get like faith bonuses from them for a few days, or like if there are new members. And so the idea being like the way you play and the cult leader that you are does affect how they feel as cult members and how much they love being in your cult.
Can the followers, do they develop at all? Do they change in terms of, are they combat? Can you bring them into fights with you? Like or is that under wraps still? Like, is there an element of the game there?
Well, actually, in very early prototypes, we had these followers come in and fight with you, but it just got it sounds really cool and really fun, but it just got in the way, and it just became it's just messy, and they were never as clever as they should be, and they got in the way when you were trying to do things, and it just wasn't fun. So again, like as Julian's saying, we tried so many things. So if it's not in the game, it's probably because it's not fun. It's not because we haven't thought of it and tried it.
Totally.
Yeah. So, but they do level up, they don't live forever either. So sadly, they do grow old and they do die of old age, but they can also die from getting sick or.
This is a long-running cult.
Yeah,
last for a long time.
Yeah. We're hoping that there's going to be plenty to keep you busy for a long time. There's a lot of stuff in this game, so we're hoping that we're going to keep you engaged for a long, long time. But yeah, they can die of old age as well as other things. So, but they can level up. The more work they do, the more they worship. The more they level up, the more efficient they are at worshipping and working and things like that. And in deeper dungeons further along in the game, the followers you find are already leveled up somewhat. So again, it kind of helps you, in the progression of the game.
It means as well, like if you go to like sacrifice some of your followers that have been in your cult longer, that have leveled up, you kind of get a better reward from them. So it's kind of like, a bit of a weird balance, and you kind of feel bad because like, oh, I've had that dude for so long, I don't know if I should. But then like the payout's really good.
Yeah. These points, bro. I'm sorry.
I've done that a few times. It's really fun.
I bet you've done everything in this game. All the terrible shit. Just before we wrap up, I did just want to ask also, so the last game that you did before this, Never Give Up, was that like hardcore platformer similar to something like a Super Meat Boy or a Celeste. However, the thing that I think was really interesting about that game is the kind of fail forward approach that it had with the button. Like the kind of key conceit of the game is that you could give up and you could hit this button to move to the next level. And how are you approaching failure in Cult of the Lamb? Are you carrying over a similar sort of approach, or is it going to be just, straightforward punishing you lost?
No, that's a really, really good point. I think with all of our games, and Adventure Pals is a very, very approachable game as well. Like, it's very kind of inclusive. And I think this is a game that has themes that are kind of not exclusive, but maybe a bit more mature for older audiences. But the way we're, and also, the sort of dungeon crawling side of the game, traditionally you'd expect that to be very hard. All of these like roguelike games are like, they're punishing, and that's kind of what people want. And so what we're trying to do, but we also seem to be appealing to people who like Animal Crossings. So we have these two very different audiences, and so this is something like we've been having crisis talks about this, and like just to draw peek behind the curtain.
People like our game. Oh no!
Yeah, oh my God, what are we going to do? It's not a problem we've had before. It's a new problem to have, but. So what we are doing, what we're working on literally at the moment, is having a dynamic difficulty manager. So what it'll do, it'll watch how you play, how much damage you take in the dungeon, how much you deal out, and based on that ratio, it'll actually under the hood move the difficulty, the needle of how difficult the game should be, and in that way, like, we are allowing the people who really have come for a challenge to have that brutal challenge, but the people who just, hey, I really just want to make my base, but I'm going into the dungeon crawling because I have to, I'm not really into this. Those people can also have a great time as well. So when you start a new game, you'll have the choice, like, you can choose easy, medium, hard, whatever, but you can also do the recommended choice, which is auto difficulty. And so, like, I think accessibility is like always been a big thing for us. I think we want as many people to enjoy the game as possible. Like, we don't want to exclude anyone. So that's something that we take very, very seriously.
This kind of come out as well because we did a big play session at the start of this month, and I just could not finish the first dungeon. So I kind of I never even finished Never Give Up. Sorry, Jay, but it was just too hard. Yeah. So yeah, I'm definitely like, we don't want to like make it feel cheap though. Basically, if you're kind of struggling a bit at the game, like, the game's going to help you along rather than it being like scaling up enemy HP or like, their damage and stuff like that. It's just basically helping along those people that might be struggling, but in a way where we won't give them any health until they're on like half a heart. So it's still going to feel like they're like, oh no, I just got out of there, I just made it, kind of thing.
For sure. I think it's kind of funny that you're saying like, oh, we want to make our games really accessible, and the last one you described as a maso core platform. It's good. So this is the world that we're coming from. But anyway,
yeah.
Jay and Julian, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for joining us for the Sifter showcase and for talking about Cult of the Lamb. It is out. Do we have a date?
2022.
2022.
No, that's all.
Floating date. Love it. I want that year for more reasons than one. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you at home for watching, for enjoying the stream. We hope that you had a good time, and to join us, for everything else that we have organized. It's going to be a good rest of a stream, I hope. Anyway, but yeah, thanks guys. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks
if you want to
so
say goodbye or spruik something before we go, feel free.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Join the cult at cultofthelamb.com. Boom, boom.
Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah, absolutely. Wish list on Steam.